Hi, everybody. Welcome to Anatomy of an Entrepreneur. Um, Ryan is not here right now to run the show, so unfortunately today I'll be looking like back and forth between my guests and the machines and trying to get everything running properly. Usually I joke around a lot in the beginning of the show and I have such a great time, but we're really not having a good time. We're in a very troubled situation. In addition to the coronavirus that we're all suffering from in the pandemic, there are a lot of protests going on around the country, and unfortunately, they're turning into situations that are less than stellar, but the protesting is very important. So I've decided that this show needs to be a special edition, and we need to talk about the situation we're in. We need to confront that, and we have to learn how are we going to work with this? How are we going to adapt to it? How are we going to help each other? How are we going to be kind to each other? So, but I am going to start with Dr. V today. She is going to still discuss coronavirus and how to deal with it, and also how do you deal with coronavirus in the midst of a protest? So I'd like to welcome Dr. V. How you doing, Dr. V?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. So tell us what's going on this week.
Um, well, I think it's a lot of chaos this week. And for once, coronavirus is not at the center of that, which I guess is a good thing for now. Numbers are just continuing to go down in Long Island. We entered phase one this week, which means that some retailers were able to open and offer curbside service. So we're beyond just essential workers now. New York City is opening up for phase one next week, so that's huge. At least that was the original plan. I don't know what's going to change in light of all the protests and whatnot, but it was looking pretty good in terms of just the virus.
Are you concerned that a lot of retail is opening up next week?
I'm concerned by the thousands of people I see in very close proximity on our streets, and certainly, at least in the city, not wearing masks and probably not washing their hands as often as they need to be when we're barely out of the woods, especially in New York City.
Right, so we haven't even opened up, and already people are close in proximity. Are you noticing less people wearing masks, things of
Right.
that sort?
Yes. Yes. Even around town in Huntington, it was a beautiful weekend, and I went to pick up dinner Sunday night, and I wouldn't say there were crowds out on the sidewalks, but certainly there were more people that I'm used to seeing, and many of those people weren't wearing masks, and they were not 6 feet apart. And again, I know people are frustrated. It's getting nice out. We've been under this for 3 months now. Um, but there's a potential for that second spike to come, and maybe even sooner in light of all the activity that's going on across the country, and certainly in New York and Long Island.
Do you think that that spike could be worse than the first time around?
I mean, there's certainly the potential for that. 14% of Long Island had tested positive. So that's 14% of people who theoretically should have some level of immunity, versus nobody having seen this virus before. It's hard to say. Coronaviruses traditionally wane during the warmer months. However, this virus seems to be doing quite well and picking up in warm places like India. So I don't know that we know what to expect from this, but it's certainly a possibility that the increase in people being outdoors and participating in a lot of these rallies and whatnot could create a second spike that could potentially be worse than the first.
So we talked about that for a second, about a spike that could occur due to the protests. The first thing I want to ask you is, are you concerned about that? Is that something that you guys are talking about in the office, in the hospitals? And the part B is that is, what could these protesters be doing to protect themselves?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're all concerned. My ER friends are concerned. They're finally being able to take a deep breath. People are going back to their regular shifts. The staff that were displaced to other locations, finally going back to their regular jobs. Our offices are just starting to open up, and we're starting to, be cautious but proceed. And so there is a concern that we could go right back to where we just came from. And that's really frightening.
That concerns me a lot because tensions are already high. I mean, they're really high. If we go through another spike, I'm really concerned not just about people getting sick, but what is going to be the emotional state of people.
Right. To consider going back to, shelter in place. I mean, Cuomo just allowed gatherings of 10 to start happening. And so I know a lot of people are taking him up on that. Um, I don't know if people are ready to go back into their homes, indefinitely so soon when we're just starting to stretch our legs. And I think that the protesters, the one that happened in Huntington Village yesterday was pretty responsible and pretty peaceful. Everybody came in a mask and they were respectful, and there wasn't any violence, and people were exercising their rights to gather and to do that. And that's great. I would say keep a bottle of hand sanitizer in your pocket, so that if you're, going to be in proximity with people, sharing signs or whatnot, sharing food, whatever's going on, where these things end, that you're being safe
And wear a mask.
and to have the mask on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I actually think this is a good segue when you start talking about the protests because our current guest is no stranger to protests. And has he been around the block and has been so involved in so many activist adventures, from hunger to social justice. And I really don't want to wait any longer because we're both going to have so many questions for him because he knows so much from having so much experience. He can relate those experiences that he lived through and kind of shed some light on us, other than the COVID, what could happen or what needs to happen. So without further ado,
Right.
I'd like to welcome Bill Ayres to our show. Hi, Bill. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so thankful that you are here for this particular show on this particular day. We couldn't have timed it better because you do know so much about living in a world with tension where people are upset, angry, feel like they're not getting their justice, and you've been involved in a lot of that. First, tell us a little about yourself, and then we can go into some of your experiences.
Sure. My name is Bill Ayres, and I've lived in Huntington for 40 years, same place. And I'm married to a wonderful woman, Janine Ayres, and I live with her and my daughter, Suzanne Ayres, and my granddaughter, Jada. I have another daughter, Michelle, who lives in Huntington as well. So I've been involved in social action all of my life. I grew up on Long Island. I went into the seminary in 1960, right out here in Huntington, Immaculate Conception Seminary, studied for the priesthood. And I learned more and more about social justice than I ever did in all those years at school. And I became very, very passionate about it. And when there was a March on Washington, 1963, the summer of 63, I was a young student at the time, and another friend of mine, Jim Casey, went down there. And, supposedly there was going to be violence and all kinds of, well, there wasn't. It was a wonderful, wonderful march. It was a march for peace and a march for justice. Dr. Martin Luther King, of course, led it, but there were several 100,000 people. And I stood there with all those people and felt like I was part of a movement. And some of the people I got to know later and worked with. I was also then on many other marches with Dr. King in Washington, here in New York City, and also other marches about civil rights on Long Island in New York City. And that was a long time ago, obviously. And there were tremendous injustices. And we really had some hope.
Yeah.
And I think that hope has come to pass to a large extent. Things are much better now than they were all those years ago, but we still have a long way to go. So I've stayed in this, and I started an organization with another Huntingtonian, the late Harry Chapin. He was my friend and partner. And we started something called Why Hunger, WHY Hunger. Why is there hunger in a world that can feed itself? Why is there hunger in the richest country in the history of the world, the United States? And we've got plenty of hunger. So we started that organization back in 1975. And we started doing hunger-thons. We did them all over the country. We'd go on the radio for 24 hours, 28 hours together. We did several in New York City. We did them in San Francisco and in Dallas and all over the country. Bringing people to an awareness that there was a problem of hunger. And we always said that the root cause of hunger is poverty, and still is that way today. And the root cause of poverty is powerlessness. When people feel powerless, that's when you have a problem. And there are many, many people, millions of people throughout our country today who also feel powerless. Not just poor people, but other people who feel powerless to make a change. So all these years, now Harry died in 1981, a terrible car accident, a lot of you know that. And I stayed on as the executive director for many, many years until just recently. And we started some really interesting things. We started the first of all, we started a hunger hotline in New York City, first one of its kind. And then we started a national hunger hotline. We still have that. And people can call us 1-800-5-HUNGRY, 1-800-5-HUNGRY, and we can connect them to emergency food in their neighborhood, any place in the country. We also have a texting service where people can text to us and we can connect them to emergency food. But that's only one step. The other step was getting involved politically. And we've had a number of wonderful allies, especially Senator Pat Leahy, Tom Downey, who was a congressman here for many years, and a number of other people in both parties. And we worked to get more federal programs, more school programs, food for kids, for school and breakfast. We had a major breakthrough just a few years ago when now any kid in New York City can get school and breakfast. That wasn't happening years ago. And we're trying to do that all over the country. The other thing that we worked on was school meals during the summertime. They don't get them because most kids are not in school. So that's the time when kids are the hungriest. Most people don't. And now we're seeing, of course, when kids are not in school, they're hungry. So folks, you need to do two things about hungry kids in this country. One of them is to donate to some of the local charities here on Long Island Cares, and Why Hunger is helping groups all over the country. But the other thing is making sure in all of these trillions of dollars of money that's coming, that a big chunk of that money will go to feed hungry kids. The president doesn't want to do that, but most people do want to do it. And we got some money for the SNAP program. That's what used to be called food stamps, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That is a godsend. That's helping to feed millions of kids, but we need to increase it. And we need to increase the school meals because obviously kids are not in school, so they need to be getting money through SNAP, and they also need to be getting emergency food. So those are some of the kinds of things that I've done. But I've also been involved over the years in some demonstrations, many demonstrations that were very, very peaceful, and a few other demonstrations that wound up to be violent. So in 1968, after Dr. King died, a friend of mine and I, other priest, I was a priest at the time, we went into Brooklyn because we were asked to by priests in there to be peacemakers. And we were out on the street trying to help people to know what was going on, to stay in their houses and to not be violent. And I got in the middle of two different gangs who were coming at each other, and another guy and myself were right in the middle. And I'm very thankful to the New York City Police Department because all of a sudden they appeared and they broke up the gangs. I had several other experiences like that, being a peacemaker, knowing that most of the people were peaceful, but also knowing that there was some people who weren't. And we've got that today. I looked at some of the footage from New York City, for example, and very peaceful demonstrations. But then at night, that's when the looters come out. That's when the agitators come out.
Why does that
So we
happen?
need to do two things.
That seems to be
Excuse
a
me?
constant.
Why does it happen?
That seems to be a constant that in the evening
Well,
it gets worse.
because it's dark, number one, and because there aren't as many people around. So uh, the police have to be all over the city, and that's very hard to do. So you saw all kinds of windows being broken. And again, these are not the protesters. These are people who are criminals, or these are people who have gotten so angry they want to take it out on businesses that are not doing anything destructive for the most part. So those are the people who have to be stopped non-violently. And so you're trying to do two things at once. Give people an opportunity to protest. And there's a lot to protest because poor people in this country, and especially poor Black people and Latino people, have been discriminated against and also treated very badly by lots of police departments throughout the country. So they have a lot of anger, but they need to be able to express that anger in a peaceful way. And it happens during the daytime for the most part now. It doesn't happen at night. So you got really two things going on at the same time. And it's very sad. And, just mentioning the thing about the virus, I'm very concerned about that as well, doctor, because I see people out there who don't have masks on. That's, for the most part, that's not with the protesters. It's later when
Right.
some of the violent people come. And that's going to spread. I have a feeling, hope I'm wrong on this, but I have a feeling that there's going to be lots and lots of outbreaks of the virus in a lot of these cities where there have been violent protests. I hope I'm wrong. So what can we do? We need to talk to our legislators and make sure that they're trying to provide peace for the people who are in the midst of all of this, protect people, but also justice. It isn't just peace, it's justice. We need to have justice for all of those who are poor, who are hungry, and who have been discriminated against. Very difficult to do that, obviously. And we need a leadership that's going to do it. I don't think we have that right now. We have it in many places throughout the country. I think we have it here in New York very well. But we need to not let up our concerns for justice and peace. That's what I've tried to do all my life, sometimes successfully and other times not so successfully. But it's been a great joy for me to be involved with some of the best people that I've ever met, and some of the people who have love in their hearts and justice in their minds and hearts.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot. Well, I've lived a long time. I've been very blessed.
Question for you. What you're seeing today, what are some of the similarities you see from the past? And what are some of the differences that you see from the past? And do some of those differences concern you more?
Well, some things that I see are much, much better. So even though there is certainly police violence, now there's not as much as there used to be. And there are laws to protect people from one another and also from unjust authorities. So that's good. There have been a lot of laws, there have been a lot of things that have been passed that have been very helpful. But it's still not enough. So that's my concern, that the anger that's felt, the hurt that's felt by so many millions of people throughout the country, and not just poor Black people, but lots of other people as well, those voices need to be heard. They need to be heard in a peaceful manner. They need to be heard, but not just heard, but then results have to happen. We need to change lots of things. And I'm hoping that that happens now. So, for example, I've noticed that there are a lot of politicians who in the past weren't talking about having a living wage, weren't talking about having a minimum wage that could be a living wage. They're talking about it now. There are a number of politicians who were not talking about having health care for everyone, but health care is a human right, just like food is a human right. We need to have those things in our country. We can do it. It's not impossible to do. We can do it. We're the greatest country in the history of the world and the richest. And we can do all of those things. So my hope is that politicians and also just everyday people are thinking in a different way now. that we're not just to think about ourselves, but we need to think about the community, and especially about people who are poor and hungry. So I think there can be some very good things come out of this. I hope and pray that they do, but I don't think we can be passive. I think we need to tell our legislators that our voices need to be heard and the voices of the poor and oppressed need to be heard. We need to make some changes that should have happened a long time ago. There are changes that have happened over the past 40 or 50 years since I've been involved in this, and I'm delighted that they've happened. We need to go further towards justice and peace and love in our community.
Do you think that because of our access to technology and anyone becomes a news person, that we see more of these injustices even though there's the same amount? Or do you think there's more of them? Which is it? Is it the technology is it allowing us to see more, or is there more?
Yeah. I don't think there are more. I think there may be less, but the ones that are there are egregious. The ones that are there are still terrible. And people are seeing things, you're right, because of the technology, because of all kinds of technology that we didn't have years ago. Technology made a big difference in the 80s because of television, largely, and radio to a certain extent. Now you've got all of this social media, and a lot of that's very good, and some of it isn't. You know, there's some very vicious people on social media, on both the right and the left. And those are not the people to listen to. People to listen to are the people who are peaceful people and seeking justice.
There's no convincing a very large minority in this country from what they believe. At the same time, we all have to peacefully coexist. And I see a lot of people who are on one side of the fence saying, oh, I have to block them from my Facebook. I can't look at this anymore. I don't think that's appropriate. I think we have to learn how to live with each other, even if you're disagreeing with each other. A, what do you think about that? And B, what can we do about it?
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously we need to live with each other and we need to listen to one another and not be yelling and screaming. Unfortunately, there's a lot of yelling and screaming that goes on by some public officials and also by people in the media. There's also a lot of really good things that are happening. And blocking people from telling those stories on television, for example, is the wrong thing. We need to have freedom to do that. And there are people who are risking their lives. Some of them got arrested unjustly from CNN the other night. We need to have a free press, and press doesn't just mean press, obviously, it means all of the media, including the social media. We need to have that, and we need to listen to one another and be open to have our minds changed. I think that there are a lot of people whose minds have been changed in the past 3 or 4 years or so.
You do?
I understand that we're very much of a divided country right now, but I do think that there are more and more people who will listen, and I'm hoping that that's true.
Wow. I don't know. I think you're a bit of a utopian thinker.
It could be, but I believe in the goodness in people, and I believe in justice, and I believe in the right to speak out, even though your view might be different than the next person's or mine. We need to be able to do that in a way that's civil, in a way that's peaceful,
Yeah.
in a way that's seeking the truth. And sometimes I listen to people and wonder where they're coming from. But then when you listen a little more, you can find that there's a lot of hurt there in the midst of all that.
There's something I want to talk about. And Meredith,
Sure.
you just join in whenever you feel like it. You just have at it. I want to talk about protesting, right? Legal protesting and civil disobedience. And I've had disagreements with people about this. Civil disobedience is breaking the law. It's not protesting. It's past protesting. By the same token, I believe we need civil disobedience. And civil disobedience isn't bringing a gun out or making a racial slur. Civil disobedience is knowingly breaking a law because you and possibly others, and probably others, believe that law needs to be changed. And I think we need civil disobedience. Agree or disagree?
Well, an unjust law obviously needs to be challenged. And we do have some unjust laws in this country, and they need to be challenged. One of the reasons why we've gotten rid of so many unjust laws, especially in the South, because people did challenge those laws, and those laws don't exist anymore. And that the reason they got changed was because people broke those laws. But to do it in a nonviolent way is the way to go, not in a violent way.
Right. So what's happening today, I wish it was civil disobedience, but it's not. It's just egregious. It's just immoral. And
Well, I think there's two things happening at the same time. One is that there are protests, legitimate protests, and then there are the people who come later into the protest, and they come from extremist positions, and they also come from a very self-serving position because they want to steal stuff. And there's no room for any of those people. Those are people who should be arrested, no question about it, but not the peaceful protesters.
Agreed.
Right. I was hearing it was actually two different groups. People, the people who are protesting during the day leave, they go home, and then these other people from wherever are coming out and doing the looting and the rioting and whatnot. So I don't know if I don't know if that's the opportunists or where they're coming from, but I think it starts out from a good place, and then their message gets hijacked by people with nefarious ideas.
How do you stop
Yeah,
it?
that's true. Yeah.
How do you stop it or reduce it?
Well, I think that you need to let the peaceful people protest and not be breaking up the protests and not harming any of the peaceful protesters. That's the first thing. Because that gives an excuse when those folks get harmed for the other folks to say, hey, look, they were peaceful and they didn't get any place, so we're not going to be peaceful. So it gives them a sort of an opening to do the wrong thing. The other thing, of course, is that that's where police presence needs to be at night. And if it's National Guard, so be it. Those folks need to be apprehended and, when necessary, arrested. They shouldn't be allowed to do this kind of thing. I think most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, would agree to that.
What was one of the craziest protests you were ever involved with?
Well, during the, let's see, this would be in the 60s again. I was involved in this case wasn't a racial thing, it was the war. I was involved in a peaceful protest down at the Lincoln Memorial. And I was the Catholic seminarian. There was a Jewish seminarian and a Protestant seminarian.
Was that the March on Washington?
This was in Washington, yeah.
Was the March on Washington, right?
No, it wasn't a March on Washington. Okay. This was a different thing. This had to do with the war. And so our job was to just be there and to not give speeches, but to answer questions if people came by, to give out literature. And we did that for a good part of the day. But about maybe 300 or 400 yards from us, a group of Nazi protesters were there, thugs, all dressed as Nazis. There's a party, and they were there. And at some point, they came after us. And, there were 3 of us, and there were about 8 or 10 of them. I thought, this isn't going to end well. But it did end well, because there were a whole bunch of Secret Service guys who somehow or another popped out of the bushes and stopped them. That was pretty scary, to know that there were Nazis in the country then, and there are now as well, part of the American Nazi Party, who were trying to cause violence and stop a peaceful protest. Never forgot it.
How did it end?
They took these guys, got these guys away from us, and we stayed there.
Right.
I was
That's the
very
big
thankful.
question now. Where does this end? How does this end? Does it end with the other three officers getting arrested and indicted? Like, where is the end of this?
Well, that's a
And
good
I don't
question.
know.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be something there because, these guys watched one of their buddies kill somebody. You don't do that. You certainly don't do it if you're a police officer. So they're responsible as well, sure.
It's
The other thing, of course, is if I were a police officer, I would be so angry at those guys. And any police
Right.
officer does that because that's not what the majority of police officers do. But they can get a terrible reputation by people like that. And there are a lot of them. So, the police officers who are there to serve the public and believe in justice need to speak out against, and I know that's a hard thing to do. You're not supposed to do that as a police officer, but you need to do it as an American.
one of the coolest things I saw were policemen or police people who were actually joining the protesters.
Yes,
I thought that was
Yes.
so freaking cool.
yes,
Yes.
that was a beautiful thing,
Yeah, because
including a police chief.
here's the statement it made. It's okay for you to protest. It's okay
Yeah.
for you to have an opinion. And you know what? I don't want you to feel like I'm here to hurt you. I'm here
Yes.
to help you get your message
Yes.
out, even if I don't agree with you. And I just
Right.
thought, what a statement that makes. That's what we need more of.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that you learned back in, let's say, the 60s, part A, that you would carry on to today, part B, that doesn't work, and people are still trying to do?
Well, one of the things I learned was if you speak out and you do it peacefully, you can get hurt in this country. It's not easy, and you don't always get hurt, but you have to stay with it. And we did, and a lot of things changed. I mean, there were just enormously important changes, laws, but also attitudes. I remember listening to a man that I grew up admiring. I won't mention his name. And he gave a talk at a college I was going to. I was at St. John's at the time. And I said to him, you don't seem to be in favor of civil rights. And he said, and he just hemmed and hawed. And I realized that he, as smart as he was, and as erudite as he was, he didn't believe in people's rights. He said, well, I do, but it has, the attitudes have to change. And I said, no, the laws have to change. If people are doing something that's illegal and they're denying people their rights and they're harming people and murdering people, you can't just wait until the bad guys change their mind. You have to have laws. That's what our country's all about, to make sure they don't do those things. He didn't buy it.
When I was in business and I ran a company, somebody once asked me, what was the most important thing I could do as the leader of a company, as a boss? I said, of anything I can do, by far the most important thing I can do is set a tone and set an example for others.
Yes.
I think that's an issue today. What do you think?
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. Our business leaders and leaders of all kinds of professions need to step up to the plate and say, these things are wrong and we need to change them. And there are wonderful groups. I've been involved with all kinds of business groups of business people who are doing the right thing, who are trying to not just make a billion gazillion dollars, but are trying to treat their workers properly and are trying to do something good for the community. There's a lot of them out there. I know them, some of them. Some of them are friends of mine, and they do great things. That's great. We need more of those folks to step up to the plate and not just be thinking about the bottom line for themselves, but how you can make a better country, a country that is less poor, a country that is less unjust, a country that is the United States of America that we all know and love.
Right, but it's not just business leaders.
No, absolutely, obviously not. No, but I thought you mentioned business leaders, and
I did mention
you know,
business leaders, but I was actually likening it to leaders of our country who
oh, absolutely,
need to be setting a tone. And I've said this
yes,
in the past to many of my friends who have different political beliefs than me, because I accept that they have different political beliefs. And I'm
sure,
happy to still be their friends. But what I do say is, above everything, we need leadership that sets a good example for others. And
yes,
that concerns me.
Right.
me too. I've worked with some wonderful, wonderful senators and Congress members and governors and all sorts of people over the years who have absolutely great consciences and get things done. And some of those men and women are still my friends. And I wish there were a lot more of them. And those are the kind of people that are elect, folks.
What do you think Harry would have been thinking about all this? And what do you think he would
Oh,
have
that's
done?
a good question. People have asked me about that. Harry would be out there. He certainly would be out there
He'd
over
be
all
out.
these years.
He'd be
Excuse me?
outraged. He'd be outraged.
Oh, obviously, outraged. And he would be using all of his power, his popularity, and putting himself on the line. No question about it. I saw him do it when we go out and do things together. Yeah, I
And
miss
by,
him terribly.
and by the way, just off the topic, if there was no Harry Chapin and no Bill Ayres, there would be no We Are the World. Because that song
Yeah,
was
that's true.
derived because of what you two were doing with Why Hunger.
Yeah. Ken Cragen, who was Harry's manager at the time and is still around, and he and I talk all the time. And he was Lionel Richie's manager. And he was Harry Belafonte had been a friend of Harry Chapin. And he called Ken Cragen one day and he said, these British guys have done this thing, over in Britain to raise money for Africa. What about American artists? Ken said, yeah, you're right. So he got Lionel to do it. He got Kenny Rogers to do it. He got a bunch of people to do it. And I helped to get some people as well, including a couple of really important people to do it. And they created We Are the World. And it's believe it or not, there are still probably about 300,000 or 400,000 downloads of that right now this year, and there'll be more now, of course. So
Yeah.
Kenny
I'm gonna
Rogers helped
download
us
it.
enormously.
That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. The other night on it was, Lionel sang it on a television show, and they were supposed to mention Why Hunger, and they didn't do it for some reason or another. So we're hoping that there's something else that's going to be happening on a CBS show. We're hoping that we get a mention on that. So, you know, we need to raise a lot of money now to help all these grassroots organizations all over the country. The people on the grassroots do wonderful, wonderful work. And right now, they're absolutely deluged. There's more hungry people in America right now than there have been in a very, very long time.
Right.
So that's something that you folks can do. You can make a donation to Long Island Cares here. You can make a donation to Why Hunger, WHYHUNGER. And we work with groups all over the country. And we help to support them and to get their work done. Some of the best people I've ever met in my life are people who are not just giving out food, but they're helping people to get jobs and childcare and healthcare and education and housing. They're people who are very much involved in social justice. And food is the first step. But when people come to a food pantry or soup kitchen, what we've done over the years is try to get them to ask the why questions. Why are you here? Don't just give people a bag of food, but ask them, why are you here? What's the problem? And make a connection. You're there. You're on the front lines. You can make a connection with all of the other resources that they need. And I think we've made a big difference in working with the emergency food people to get them to see beyond food into livelihoods. And that's what we need to be doing today.
I have just one more question before we go. Meredith, do you have any more questions?
No, I mean, I'm just really enjoying this. I think you've answered a lot of the ones I was thinking about.
So here's my big question of the day. Bill, you know,
Oh boy.
we don't know each other that well, but I know you better than you know me just because you've been out there and you've got a name. Nobody knows who I am. The Bill Ayres that I know and who I've met at various occasions as part of being on the board of the Harry Chapin Foundation is a very optimistic man. I am, too, a very optimistic person. And I am optimistic that we're going to get through all this. By the same
Yes.
token, I am very concerned about what's going on. And that is everything from the deaths and the sickness from COVID-19 to the looting and the rioting. And it makes me feel a little bit, you know, in Yiddish we call it spilkies, kind of like agita.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us some of the things that we can do. Give us, it doesn't even have to be your prognosis, but you give us some of your optimism. Make us feel better.
Well,
Yes.
I'm in a strange, I'm in a strange position now because I'm on the sidelines. You know, I'm retired. And I was doing a radio show for, we never talked about that, but I did a radio show every Sunday night
For a long
for
time.
44 years,
I know.
BLJ.
I used to listen.
And yeah, okay. But the station got sold and we all lost our jobs. So I don't have that voice anymore that I used to have. And I have retired from Why Hunger. I'm still very much involved, but I'm not on the front lines anymore. And that bothers me. I see so much going on and I want to be doing more. So I hope you all feel that way as well. Ask yourself what you can do, how you can make a difference. Maybe it's just in a small thing. Maybe it's in looking in on a neighbor who you haven't seen in a while. You know, maybe it's that you know somebody in your kid's class who doesn't have much money and they're going hungry. Maybe there's a way you can do that on a personal level. That's the one thing. But the other thing then is look beyond your neighborhood and think about our society as a whole. And ask yourself what you're going to be doing with your vote, with your donations, to make sure that the people we elect are people who believe in justice, are people who believe in peace, are people who will stand up to oppression, who will stand up to lies, who will represent us as American political leaders should. Vote for those kind of people. And then also join organizations that are involved in helping people, not just hunger, but poverty, housing, childcare, healthcare, all of those things. There are wonderful, wonderful people. I've met hundreds of people who are just some of the best people I've ever met in my life, who have given their lives for this stuff. Maybe you can do just a little bit to work with them.
That's great advice. And I think by helping others, it does help you make you feel better.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
Well,
is true.
Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on tonight. I mean, it couldn't have come at a better time, and I really would love to have you back on. Would you come back on again?
Sure, sure.
That'd be awesome. Well, and
Doctor, it's good to meet you.
Likewise, so nice to meet you.
everybody loves Dr. V. I haven't met one person yet who doesn't love Dr. V. So we will see you next week. Unfortunately, and I've been looking up here, I made credits and it didn't download from the cloud. Talk about technology, so we don't have credits tonight. So we're just going to say goodbye, and we'll see you next week. We are working on some other guests. Let me see. You know what I think I'll do? I will play the intro again to say goodbye. Let's see. We got this here. Thanks again, Dr. V, and thank you very much, Bill Ayres. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a nice night, everybody, and see you next week.